Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. And we got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we are currently podcasting about New York City in the 80s.
I cover pop culture.
And I do rip from the headlines. And I've got a good one for you today, Jessica.
Okay, I'm getting ready. Okay, before you even begin, Is there a trigger warning today?
No.
Oh, thank God.
Absolutely not.
I'm so relieved. Okay.
And before we get started, I just wanted to, we've had some viewer feedback. A listener feedback that I thought you might be interested in.
Is it about me?
Not specifically.
Boo.
Our dear friend Ray, who we went to school with at the Nightingale Bamford School.
Yay, Ray.
Has reached out to make sure that we know. Oh, by the way, you know Ray has this gorgeous farm in Maine and is a bona fide farmer.
I've seen the photos and they are exceptional. It looks idyllic.
It really does. It looks like heaven with lambs and piggies and
Lambkins.
peacocks and
animals.
And eggs and animals.
And flowers.
Yes. But Ray wanted to make sure, I got this through Facebook, just dropping in to assure you that you missed absolutely nothing by avoiding Starlight Express.
Oh.
So just in case.
All right. Well, I do.
That.
Thank you, Ray. I feel like all is right in my world now. I'm centered.
Although I've got to say, I've been doing some research on Starlight Express. Oh, man. We could do a whole episode on Starlight Express.
Well, are you aware of the fact that Rockefeller Center is now, the ice skating rink has been turned into a roller skating rink?
Yes, I actually brought it up.
You did?
Yes,
okay, well,
we've discussed it.
It's nice to meet you. My name is Jessica, and I am...
And I want to go roller skating.
I'm in. I'm totally in.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
All right. Clearly, there's something wrong with me.
It's okay. It's been a long week.
What? A week?
Yes. Okay. So, shall we get started?
Please.
Did you do Knickerbocker by any chance?
Thank God, no. When you guys were doing Knickerbocker, I was still at my hippie French bilingual school. So, no.
Well, Knickerbocker is a dance class for kids in the city. My kids did it. And when we were younger, it was sort of the guaranteed way to ultimately get invited to the gold and silver and all of these cotillion balls. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, those dances are much more inclusive, by the way, like everybody gets invited. But in our day, you had to either be on the committee or have a friend on the committee. And in order to be on the committee, you had to go to Knickerbocker. And so it was a kind of a to-do, right?
The gold and silver was a charity ball that was the height of the junior preppy season. Right. And it was usually at the Plaza Hotel.
The Waldorf, actually.
Oh, the Waldorf, excuse me. It was like if you cared about things like that, it was a status thing.
It was also just fun, I think.
If you cared about, okay.
We can have different experiences. All right. So today's story, my sources are an A&E biography that I watched on YouTube, a 1987 article in McCall's magazine, and a New York Post article in 2021, and another source that I'm not going to name right now because it gives the whole thing away.
Okay.
All right. But I think you're going to catch on pretty quickly.
Okay. I'm very excited.
Sidney Biddle Barrows' ancestors. On both her father and her mother's side, came to America on the Mayflower. And she is descended from the distinguished and wealthy Philadelphia Biddles. But she grew up in a modest home with a single mother in Hopewell, New Jersey. And while her wealthy grandfathers spent most of their inherited money, she did enjoy some of the trappings of old wealth. Her grandparents were able to send her to Stoneleigh Burnham. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's an all-girls boarding school in Greenfield, Massachusetts. She was actually expelled. For sneaking off campus to meet a boy. So she ended up graduating from public school, and she made her debut that season in New York City because she was a descendant of people from the Mayflower.
having a debut is so out of fashion now. I don't think people who are what I'm just going to casually refer to as normal human beings know exactly what that means. Do you want to quickly explain?
When you're introduced to society and there's a series of parties that you go to, that's what Metropolitan is about, that movie. The season where everybody's going to the different parties and going to the different balls.
You were part of a group of young women copying the British coming into society and like meeting the Queen, and you had to be all in a white dress. If you watch Bridgerton, you'll know that what we're talking about is actually what Lady Eloise really didn't want to do at the opening of this season. So.
Right. So there's a version of that in New York. And so she did that. She was presented to society at a ball held in the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. And shortly after that, she enrolled at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology, where she majored in fashion merchandising. And after that, she went on to work at Abraham and Straus.
Interesting.
Remember that place?
I certainly do. Continue.
Okay. And she became a buyer for the Cutting Edge.
What was that?
It was like a middleman between the stores and
the
the
manufacturers.
But she was fired from the Cutting Edge when she refused to work for a man who she suspected of taking kickbacks.
She had principles.
There's a little bit of moxie in this girl, which is part of her story, I think. When she was in the unemployment line, she met a girl named Gina, and they became friends. And when Sidney visited Gina's apartment, she noticed Gina's very expensive stereo. This is Sidney speaking. Quote, "She didn't have any more money than I did, so I asked her where she got it from. She uncharacteristically wouldn't give the answer, but finally broke down and said, 'I answer the phones for an escort service.' I said, 'Oh, what's an escort service?' Gina filled Sidney in and also told her she made $50 a night. Now, Sidney was getting $150 a week from unemployment. So $50 a night sounded pretty good. So.
And so what year is this?
1978. Okay. So Sidney started answering phones for Gina's boss, Eddie. This is another quote from Sidney. All the girls hated Eddie. He made them work 7 nights a week. These are the sex workers, with no time off and virtually no social life. Not surprisingly, the girls came up with a stream of excuses why they wouldn't be available that night. In the 3 months that I was there, she was there answering the phones, some of the girls' grandmothers must have died 2 or 3 times. So Sidney and Gina quit Eddie's escort service and started their own, Cachet. They had a business plan. Quote, "Despite the vast amounts of sleaziness and deceit in the escort industry, I believed it didn't have to be that way. I was sure I could run an agency that was successful, elegant, honest, and fun. I had seen enough mistakes to know what not to do, and I had no moral qualms. As I saw it, there was a sector of the economy crying out for the application of good management skills. They accepted credit cards and ran ads in newspapers. They offered health insurance."
Oh.
Right? Quote, "Other ads in places like Screw Magazine and Backpage showed grainy pictures of a woman with her legs in a Y shape with the headline, 'See you in my valley.'"
That's just a crime against copy.
Yeah, I need to find a copy of that.
Okay.
But we designed this very spare, elegant-looking ad saying, "New York's most trusted service." Cachet would only hire women who had another job, model, actress, writer, or who were in school. No career sex workers. And Sidney was very particular about how they dressed. Elegant dresses, high heels, stockings, no matter how hot it was. Quote, "Dress like you're going to lunch at 21 with your grandfather."
Hot.
I always paid close attention to types of girls. I knew, for example, that I could use only a certain number of tall brunettes. Tall, busty blondes were another story. I could always have used more of them.
Huh.
The the sex workers would take home 60% of the $125 an hour fee, which could add up to $3,000 a week in cash. They were only sent to the finest hotels in the city, the Pierre, the Waldorf, and they were instructed to only have, quote, straight sex and oral sex, period, end of story, and no condoms, unless the client requested them.
Interesting.
Yep. Sidney paints a rosy picture of cachet. The women were happy. The men were nonviolent. In 1982, Gina decided to get out of the business, leaving Sidney in charge. Sidney set up an office in a residential building at 307 West 74th Street. This is where the women would check in to get their assignments.
Okay, so that's between first and second, or second and third.
I'll take your word for it.
I'm just, okay. Yeah, I'm just getting a mental picture. Go ahead.
I can definitely picture like those blocks of row houses. And it also acted as a kind of green room. So it's where the women would, hang out. But a guy who lived on the first floor got suspicious of all the comings and goings. He stole Cachet's trash from the garbage bags on the curb and handed it over to the landlord, who promptly called the police. The trash included notes detailing clients, hotels, times, amounts, and critiques. Quote, John is a big-time movie producer. Too bad he doesn't have a big part.
Oh, sassy sex workers.
Okay. In 1984, police raided Cachet and arrested 3 sex workers who were there just hanging out watching TV. Now, Sidney wasn't there. She was actually on a blind date.
Was that a real date or was she seeing a client?
She said she was on a blind date. She had a whole other life. She did this for a living, and then she hung out with like her society friends.
And did they know?
No. They all thought she just worked in fashion. Right? They had absolutely no idea.
Okay.
So the next day, she bailed out the women, and then she turned herself in.
No.
Yeah. I mean, she called a lawyer, and they were like, you got to turn yourself in because there's a warrant out for you.
Oh, there was a warrant out
yeah.
for her. Oh.
And she was released on $7,500 bail. The New York Post can take credit for the moniker, the Mayflower Madam. Both the Post and the Daily News ran nude pictures of Sidney that an old boyfriend from FIT had taken of her.
Well, that is just sleazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so the Post was running fully nude photos?
Apparently, like she was naked, but I don't think you could see her private parts.
Interesting.
I tried to find them. But I also kind of didn't want to find them because that's really awful. Her boyfriend took naked pictures of her. He sells them and they put them in
You do
the newspaper?
realize what era we live in now, right?
What do you mean?
Well, people snapping photos of themselves and whoever and putting them online.
Well, this sounds like revenge porn to me, and it sounds horrible. I mean, these were private pictures that were supposed to be for personal use.
I understand.
Okay. They also published pics of her with her society friends in West Hampton.
Well, that I would not find acceptable. That is guilt by association, Muffy.
Exactly.
No, thank you.
And they did not like seeing their pictures in the paper next to the Mayflower Madam.
Did she get a lot of phone calls like, oh, Sidney?
Well, that actually comes up later. All right. She was actually unfazed. She threw the Mayflower Defense Fund ball at the Limelight, where people dressed like they were attending a debutante cotillion.
Now that is moxie.
I know, right? She wore a white dress and white gloves and stood in a receiving line to greet her guests who paid $40 to attend. The proceeds went to her defense lawyers, who were worth their fee. Their defense strategy? They threatened to release the clients in her black book, many of whom were lawyers. So the district attorney offered a plea bargain. Sidney pled guilty to 1 count of promoting prostitution and got a $5,000 fine. Sweetheart deal. She was quite the celebrity in the 80s, as we both recall.
Yes, indeed.
She wrote a book called The Mayflower Madam, which I've been quoting from, which was #1 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list and was turned into a made-for-TV movie starring
I have no idea.
Candace Bergen.
Oh, God, that's good casting.
And she appeared on all the talk shows, all of them. Donahue, you name it. She went on the lecture circuit through the Learning Annex, telling women why their husbands go to sex workers and how they can keep their husbands at home. Some of this hasn't aged well, Sidney.
I'm just loving how, like, on the one hand, I'm sort of rooting for Sidney and remembering her from the time, and on the other hand, I'm like, this is some backwards shit, you know. Talk about privilege. That she was able to, if you'll excuse the expression, straddle the line between these two worlds.
You are good, Jessica. She married and divorced Darnay Hoffman. She wrote and performed a one-woman show called How Did a Nice Girl Like You? She was definitely taking advantage of this moment of celebrity, as she had to because she had no income anymore and could not get a job. Now, currently, 2022. Now she gives business advice to entrepreneurs who pay $2,200 for 4 90-minute phone sessions. She lives in the same one-bedroom Upper West Side rent-controlled apartment as she did in 1984.
Upper West Side?
Mm-hmm. Quote, I have no regrets. I didn't plan on it. I just fell into it. I don't feel I've done anything wrong. There are a lot of girls out there who wouldn't have gone to college if it weren't for being involved in my escort service. Sad and bizarre note.
Mm-hmm.
Darnay Hoffman, her ex-husband, was Bernie Goetz's and Joel Steinberg's lawyer, and he committed suicide in her apartment in 2011.
What?
I know. That's like crazy stuff.
That is crazy.
I know. Do you want to hear some quotes? This one I don't think has aged well. I think women have lost sight of their femininity. Men call us, meaning her escort service, because they want real girls.
Sidney.
This one also is pretty bad. The more you act like a lady, the more he'll act like a gentleman.
Oh, is that all it takes?
Right.
Okay.
The next two aren't quite so bad. A call girl is simply someone who hates poverty more than she hates sin.
That's actually a great line.
Yeah. And this one, never say anything on the phone that you wouldn't want your mother to hear at your trial.
Oh, okay. That's...
I know.
You're ending on the perfect note. That's really ideal.
But yeah, the fact is she was a pretty conservative person. I mean, I appreciate her moxie. I love her hustle.
But she was true to type. She was a product of her environment and somehow managed to justify this one portion of her life that was completely way out there.
And it's true. I mean, talk about privilege, because if she had been any other kind of pimp, which is exactly what she was, she would have gotten in a hell of a lot more trouble.
Yeah, she wouldn't have been on Donahue. Remember, I mean, let's just have a moment about Donahue, can we?
Donahue.
God, is he still alive? I think so.
Sure, he lives in my dad's building.
Are you kidding me right now?
No.
We could go knock on
with
his
Marlo.
door. Are you kidding me right now?
No.
Oh my God. What are we doing here?
I see her and him all the time.
We have to go over to your dad's house now. Oh my God. Phil Donahue. He had the best delivery. His whole shtick was, what do I know? I know nothing. And then, tell me everything. He was so charming and completely wackadoodle.
I adored him. We have to do a story that loops in some of those. There was a Donahue with those club kids.
I remember that.
You can see a lot of them on YouTube.
Yes. And, you know, and Maury Povich used to be like that, but then it just became a paternity test show. Oh, no. Now we sound like Natasha Lyonne. What are you doing? Back to Jackie Mason. The reason I love that story is because it really is so New York. It's this seamless blending of complete opposites and people just finding a way to live in that gray area happily.
And what she was justifying felt very 80s. It's about making money. What's the problem here?
Yes.
And also about gender roles. So there's nothing to apologize for there.
I love it. I love it. It is as 80s as it gets, the Mayflower. And not to throw cold water on the Knickerbocker Club. But that whole scene, like society, the remnants of Mrs. Astor's 400, they were still skulking in the corners when we were kids. And now really passé. Like I can't imagine that anyone would give half a fig for
Alice
any of that.
didn't want to go to the Gold and Silver. I was like, come on.
She was like,
It's
it's not
fun.
cool.
It's not cool. Oh, and by the way, her name was dropped from the social register.
Social death. I'll ruin you socially, Sidney. Well, I guess that's what that means. I'll ruin you socially. You're off the list.
But the funny thing is, they have pictures of that ball that she held at
And
the
it was
limelight.
indistinguishable from any normal debut.
Well, you would think that all those people in West Hampton would be scandalized and wouldn't want to be associated with her, but they actually thought it was a hoot. And they all showed up. A Biddle cousin showed up in a tiara to show that she was cool.
Well, if you think about the era, the 80s being the go-go 80s as they were, it's very similar to the 1920s. And in the 20s, I know you know about this, but in London, the bright young people who were the society kids were doing stuff like that all the time to scandalize and be cooler than cool by being outré, if you will. It's right on brand for her.
Yeah,
It's an old school way of being naughty.
Yeah. No, they seemed like they were having a blast.
Well, it's probably a good party. For $40 a head back then. You mentioned something about Sidney Biddle Barrows.
I did. I mentioned a few things.
That is pertinent to what I have to talk about.
Okay.
So keep your ears open, see if you can see the crossover.
All right.
I was talking to someone who was asking me, do we always do something where there's crossover? And I was like, not intentionally. And then I started to think, like, why is it that there's so much crossover in our stories? And then I had the biggest moment of, I'm an idiot. Oh yeah, it was the 80s.
In New York City.
In New York City.
10 years, one place.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why, for those of you who are listening and wondering and had that question, it's the whole point of the podcast.
Right. But we don't plan in advance. I mean,
No.
we don't tell each other. We surprise
We don't know what we're
each
going
other.
to talk about. Alfie's a little woofy down there.
He's
So-
eager to know what you're going to talk about.
I know. Well, okay. So we didn't start with our engagement question like we normally do.
That was
So-
the Knickerbocker thing.
Oh, yeah. That's right. You did. So, okay. My engagement question is, how did you get spending money when you were a teenager?
I had a series of after-school jobs. I worked at P.S. I Love You. It was a card shop. I worked at Grand Gelato that sold gelato.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what else?
How
did I
old were
do?
you when you started doing this?
Junior year of high school, I believe I had.
So 16?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, what I'm talking about today is working as a kid
Okay.
in the 80s. I just don't think it's the same thing these days. So as the person with children, you can tell me how far off it is.
Yeah. I mean, Alice had an internship.
No.
No.
Not internships. No.
Has she worked retail? No, she has not worked
Okay.
retail.
I mean,
or food service.
you know what? I worked so many places as a teenager that I actually forgot that I worked retail. I worked at the Gap.
You also worked at PS.
I know
Love
I worked
You.
at PS I Love You with you. I know that. I know that. But I had totally forgotten about the Gap. And want to know why I didn't last there?
I can guess.
Yeah? What do you think?
I think you probably got bored.
Well, I did. That's a unifying theme for many jobs I've had, that I got bored and forgot. The problem that I had with the Gap was that my job was to fold the wall of jeans. Do you remember the wall of jeans? It was so dusty that I was having allergy attacks constantly.
So fragile.
I was like a little flower. And I was such a mess. I went home and said to my mom, "No, I can't do it anymore. I don't feel well." She's like, "Well, line up another job and figure it out." And I was like, okay. Interestingly, though, I had that job when I was 15. It was like a end of summer job, I think. It was a little dicey. I can't even remember how I got the job because you were not supposed to work. You were not employable until you were 16 in New York City. Again, I don't know if that's still the case. So I'm going to take us on a little tour
Okay.
of kids working in the city. starting up at the Upper East Side, hitting Midtown, and then going down to Wall Street. Like you, I worked at C'est Moi, the card store, and had made a habit of eating all of the chocolate.
It was C'est Moi. It wasn't P.S. I Love You.
No,
P.S. I Love You had all those cute little turtlenecks with hearts all over them. That's where I liked to shop. But where I worked was C'est Moi.
C'est Moi was right around the corner from us, from school.
Yeah. And they had 2 locations. There was another one on 96, and I worked there.
Yes. Oh my God, I remember that.
But someone was held up there. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Well, do you know why I ceased to work there?
I do know why. Are you going to tell?
Yes. I think it was the summer before going to college. And I was with my mother at Bloomingdale's during the day, being tortured, having to get some clothing to get ready for college. And in the middle of shopping, I freaked out because I remembered I was the one who had to open the store. And instead, I was shopping in Bloomingdale's. It's a moment of privilege, and I'm going to own it. My mother didn't know what happened. I ran out of there so fast. I was like, I'm in trouble.
You're in so much trouble.
I tried so hard. And the woman who owned it, I don't remember what her name was.
Neither do I, but she had very short blonde hair.
She just looked at me with utter disgust and said, I think you need to give me the keys to the store back. I was like,
but also
my
a
pleasure.
16-year-old opening a store. It wasn't.
Well, I think that's
safe.
sort of, no, but that's part of my point about working when we were that age, is that we were going into situations that were also legit jobs for adults.
Yeah.
So yeah, opening the store, any 16-year-old I now know, I wouldn't let them open an envelope, much less a store. I have no idea what she was thinking that we were little grown-ups and that was a normal thing to do.
And the girl who was held up at gunpoint on 96th Street at the C'est Moi, she buzzed someone in, and then it was just her in a small store with a guy with a gun. And it could have gone so much worse. He just stole the money. Thank God.
Thank God. So yeah. So there we were. Jobs, that was something that we did after school during the summer. And if we had anything going on during the summer, it was that little stretch between returning and starting school again. The other thing that a lot of people did was waiting tables or trying to do something in that world. So as we go down the East Side, we're now going to go to Cafe Bianco. Do you remember Cafe Bianco?
No, where's that?
77th and 2nd.
Okay, but
it no
first,
longer exists.
Can I say Grand Gelato, which is was on 91st and 3rd? That was my gelato store that Manaz and I worked at together.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how cute. Well, I worked at C'est Moi with you and Amy Gottlieb. And Amy Gottlieb was with me. She was with me when Paul Newman walked into the store.
Ooh, Christy Brinkley walked in when I was on duty.
But Paul Newman.
Okay. Sorry, Paul Newman.
So I tried working at Cafe Bianco, and bizarrely, they gave me a job as the hostess. I'm a very short person. To be a hostess, you have to be tall and commanding. I was really not the presence they were looking for. And it was a really hot place to go at the time. And it was filled with yuppies who were pushing to get in like later at night. And I yelled at them and left. So another bad moment in working.
Can I tell you another Grand Gelato story?
Yes.
They also had another storefront down on McDougal Street. So that's when I started.
I remember that one.
It was a gorgeous shop, actually. It was beautiful. But the guy who owned it, we thought it was maybe a front for the mafia, because whenever the owner... It was on
McDougal Street.
Whenever the owner showed up with his friends, they were really kind of slimy.
They were like...
I didn't like their attitude towards me at all. And this one guy once said to me, you'd be in a better mood if you sat on my face.
Oh, how charming.
He said that to a 16-year-old girl.
Well, they're known for their good manners.
I was scandalized. I thought it was
as well
very
you should
rude.
have been. But to get back to working.
Yes.
We grew up during a period when, as we started to talk about during your Mayflower Madam piece, Alfie? No editorializing. We were sort of the tail end of things being done the old ways.
Okay.
And one example of that is that at Nightingale, we had to take typing classes. And I don't know if you know this or remember this, but we didn't have typing facilities at the schoolhouse. So I was sent with BFF of the podcast, Regina George.
She's showing up in every
It is
single
ridiculous.
episode.
We were sent together to Elaine Revelle Secretarial School.
Wow.
To prepare us for jobs. Even though we were at the school that was teaching us be a master of the universe or a mistress of the universe, at the same time, off we went to typing classes.
Wow.
It didn't do well it didn't take. I was with Regina, so we were just goofing off the entire time. Later on, when I was in college and had to get jobs, and admittedly, I got fired from a lot of legit jobs. Like I worked for a focus group and I was bored and spaced out and it wasn't good. But then I realized the right thing for me, and this should have told me a lot about myself at the time, if I only knew, temping.
Oh, yes.
Was
great.
the thing. And I don't know if kids temp anymore, but it was the best gig you could possibly get. You'd register with a temp agency or multiple temp agencies, and then you'd be working pretty much nonstop. And lo and behold,
answering phones and stuffing envelopes and doing stuff like that in offices.
Exact, including typing. And miraculously, I don't know what it was, but the typing kicked in. It was like a survival instinct because I remember I had to go to, God, what was the temp place called? It'll come to me. But you had to take a typing test. And that was a really big thing because if you did well on the typing test, you didn't have to get the shittiest jobs.
Right.
So I tried really, really, really hard and eventually got there. But before I got there, I had to open all of the entries that were letters for a sweepstakes for a magazine. That was fun. And talk about old fashioned. I worked for Crane's New York business in the telephone operator room where I literally had like those cables, like in I Love Lucy.
Gosh, are you serious?
I'm totally serious. Where I had to be like, hold please, one ringy dingy. Let me put you through to Mr. So-and-so. And that
is incredible.
It was. It's totally bizarre.
It's like going back in time.
But was it? It was just back in time.
Right. But I do kind of remember that some of the places that would hire temps where I would be answering phones where I was like, you guys haven't changed your pants since 1965. This is...
Or your technology since 1945. Yeah. Yes. But then once I started to do well on my typing tests, well, things got better. And here's the Sidney Biddle Barrows crossover. We were required by these agencies to wear stockings and suits. And if not a suit, a skirt and like a twin set or a blouse and a little sweater, something like that. But stockings and high heels. And I remember that going to these different jobs in the summertime in New York City in August, it's so hot that the tar in the street melts and your heels sink into it. And it was just one of the many banes of our existence. It was like, oh, look, a rat. And I'm stuck in tar, so I can't run away.
Because you're wearing pumps.
I'm wearing pumps and stockings. But I did have some really good temp jobs. And my favorite one was I was hired by, and this is very 80s, so that's why I'm bringing it up. There was a company that was conference rooms and offices and like a gym and a chef, like really professional kitchen for companies that didn't have those amenities, but they had like big meetings or retreats.
Okay.
And so you could go there and it like rent the space so you could have your fancy whatever.
I feel like the city is chock full of places like that now, but they might have been rather rare at the time.
It was very rare at the time. And here's what's even rarer. They were ready to go and they had people booked, but they didn't have any of the stuff that they needed in the kitchen, in the sauna, in the bathrooms.
It's like Firefest.
Exactly. So what did they do? They hired a 19-year-old from a temp agency.
They hired Jessica Dorfman. Oh my God.
They gave that kid...
This is more Firefest by the minute.
It is. They gave me a credit card, a car, service car, like a chauffeur, and told me, here's the list go shopping.
Oh my God. I would have loved that
Are you
job.
kidding me? It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it spoiled my concept of what jobs should be forever. I was like, well, if I could just go shopping every day, I was ahead of the curve when I didn't show up for C'est Moi. I already know how to do this. So I went and talk about, again, it's the 80s. I went to Bonwit Teller to get all of the towels, and Bloomingdale's to get all of the pots and pans. And where else? There were all like Lord and Taylor and all of the places that are now
I bet you were
gone.
actually excellent at that job.
Well, I was raised by my mother.
I was just thinking I wouldn't have known what pots and pans to get, but I think you knew exactly what
No,
you needed.
here's how my mother trained me. When I was a kid, I was mortified because my mom would walk into our other home, Bloomingdale's, and immediately say, as loudly as she could, I need help. I need help. Who wants to help me? And some poor minion would come running, knowing, I'm going to make a commission, but I'm going to make it the hard way right now. So I would saunter into Bonwit Teller and say, I need to fully outfit a spa. What do I need?
Know when you need to ask for help.
That's it. So they would take one look at me and be like, this is a child in pumps. And then be like, oh, we're going to sell you the contents of the store. Do you have plastic? Yes, I do. Right on. So that was awesome. And it was fuck-upable. It was.
And did your bosses, were they just like, you're a genius?
No, they were just so happy that things were I was like Santa's elf. Things were just magically appearing, and I knew how to I'll fold this towel very nicely and put it in here.
I'm so proud of you.
I had one job that really worked out. Let's go a little further downtown. Also go 80s. I worked on Wall Street for, I guess they were brokers. But it was all, dudes with swept-back hair and pinstripe shirts and, right out of American Psycho.
Right.
They were doing coke all day at their desks. And
Ew.
they did this weird kind of pretending not to let me know. And then they'd be like, you want some? And I was like, definitely not for me. Thanks. Yeah. I don't feel safe. Again, these days, could you imagine having an 18-year-old kid in your office being like, hey, you want blow? Go talk to HR. Right. They'll take care of you. No problem. So these guys were totally bananas, but they were nice. They didn't mean any harm, but they should have known better. Why? Because in 1987, and this is also one of my early temp jobs, I was working downtown and I was witness to a very major event. Do you remember what happened in 1987 regarding Wall Street and money?
Was there a crash?
Yes, honey, there was a very big crash.
There have been a few.
Yeah.
Is that in 87?
Yes, that was in 87. And I'm even going to tell you, it was 1987. And the events that I'm going to describe happened. Black Friday was in October. So this must have been May that this happened. So there was so much cocaine flying around Wall Street, so much of it, that the cops, there was no way to look the other way. So they had a big sting operation. They set it up so that there was some group of guys at one of the banks that were dealing as well as buying. And the New York Police Department named their sting Buy and Cry, because if you bought the coke, you were going to cry. Uh-huh. You were going to lose your license. You couldn't be on Wall Street anymore. You couldn't be a trader. So they had this giant sting. I remember, and it took me years to put these two things together. But I was down there and I saw all of these guys in suits with their hands up against the wall on one of the main buildings that's right across from Trinity Church.
Wow.
And I was like, what the hell is... And of course, I assumed it had something to do with drugs, but I had no idea what it was. And as I was researching for this, I was like, oh my God, that's what I
You were a
saw.
witness
Operation Buy and Cry.
Now, what is the connection with the Coke sting and the crash?
None. I'm just putting it in time.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
giving you a sense
This
of
all
like
happened at the same time,
so just
completely
think of like
unrelated.
the go-go 80s, and all of that activity was fueled by ridiculous amounts of money. So not only were the police finally cracking down, but this incredibly irresponsible, well, you know, we've talked about this many times with my father, you know, like what are the reasons behind the financial crisis, which we won't get into.
Yeah, we'll have to have Bert on to explain the financial crisis.
But it was the end of the gravy train. In summation, counselor, my favorite story about temping is actually the following. And this happened late in college, so it might have been 1990. Other BFF of the podcast, Nick.
Oh, yes.
Our beloved Nick. Well, like me, Nick didn't really take to working very much. And Nick was also temping for the obvious reasons. Like me, he got bored a lot. One day, remarkably, I show up for my temp job, and who's there also for the temp job but Nick?
How fun.
And we were like, what the hell? What's going on? And the office looked really weird. It looked like it had been half cleared out. The people who were there were kind of furtively rushing around. And the person came out and was like, okay, you're just going to have to answer the phones. And when you answer the phones, just say that no one is here today and we're closed today. Nick and I looked at each other and we knew something bad was happening at this place.
And you were covering up.
I looked at him, he looked at me, and he will never forgive me for this. It comes up every 5 years. I was like, smell you later. Gotta go.
You left.
I left. So I was like, you got the job. He was like, I hate you with every fiber of my
abandoned him
being.
there?
Well,
I would have stayed just out of curiosity.
My mother was going to kill me if I didn't bring
Fair
home
enough.
the bacon.
So
This is
what
the woman
happened?
who terrorized Bloomingdale's.
What happened to Nick?
Well, he's still alive, as you know. He made it out. Like nothing.
I bet he's got a great story.
Well, maybe we need to get him on here for a follow-up.
All right, fine.
So this is less an analysis of socioeconomic conditions for young workers in the 80s. This is more of, well, here's some shit that happened when I tried to work. And, you know, it's really 80s because drugs and stockings and
retail
and retail
food service
exactly
and Gap.
Yes.
Folding jeans at the Gap.
Folding jeans. That is when someone says, what is your personal hell? I revise it frequently, but I frequently do return to the wall of jeans at the Gap. Oh, and just wait to cap it off. Again, old fashioned. You know, linen is very popular right now.
Okay.
But at the time, in the summertime, you wore poplin, linen, or seersucker in our preppy world. Like that was it. And I remember I had an entire wardrobe of linen skirts, and you'd sit down in your sweaty stockings and the linen would instantly accordion up.
Exactly.
And you just
always
looked,
wrinkled and horrible.
yeah, I'm like not in a cool,
No.
like, hey, I'm on the beach in Santa Monica kind of way. No, sweaty and crumpled up like the tie that a schoolboy leaves at the bottom of his bag. That's what you are. You're just a sweaty scrap. Anyway, so those are some moments of attempting to work in the 80s. You're welcome.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm glad that you finally found the thing that fits perfectly for you.
Hanging out with you and
Yes.
talking? Yes, okay. Yes. Yes, I found the perfect way to work. Who knew? Give it to me. Okay, so the more that I reflect on your story, Meg, the more I realize that there is something so quintessentially New York in there that we kind of have to highlight, which is no matter what happened to the Mayflower Madam, no matter how her fortunes rose or fell, she stayed in her rent-controlled one-bedroom apartment. Even with the death of her husband in there, she did not move. And you can't be more of a New Yorker than that.
Yes.
So it's the end of another podcast. How can people engage with us?
We would love for you to follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. And we would love for you to rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We want to hear your stories. Any ideas that you have for us, we want to research them and we want to tell you about them.